All right, Leila, we're back for the last leg. So I want to start with, we're going to talk about how children end up coming to you and what that process looks like how they move, how a family contacts you, and then how you move into deciding whether to work together, and then what that working together looks like, and the issues and things that you work on with these kids look like. And I think it'd be helpful for other families to kind of understand what it is to actually find that help, what it could look like. Because right now, I know for me in the beginning, it was I was just hodgepodging it together. So I was taking a piece of therapy from over here and what I was learning in nature over here, and something from a homeschool group over here, and a doctor over here. And I was just creating something to either try and figure out resources or helping Dominic. And I didn't have, and nobody really knew the knowledge. I just was getting pieces from each person. So where I want to start with is, how do families, parents end up finding you, and kind of what state do they kind of come in? I mean, I'm sure it varies between family to family, but what it kind of looks like.
So usually, I mean, like you said, it varies, but usually families find out about me through word of mouth. And thus far, that has been the best mode. So although I'm getting better at the technology part of it, but it's usually through referrals or word of mouth. And typically, the families that I tend to get are families that have essentially been through everything they can think of, and this is their last ditch chance. Like, they're willing to try something that's a little bit more unusual or a little bit more holistic. And that means like families who have been to, the side of mental health, healthcare, diagnosis. And usually those are the families that I typically get.
What is usually, and once again, I know it varies between parent to parent. I know when I had finally contacted you, I feel like I was a little bit further um, in the journey. I mean, I had already had this podcast, so I wasn't at the beginning where I was desperate. And by desperate means I didn't take whatever they said as what I needed to do. It wasn't that. It was that I was just desperately seeking for something to feel right. And all these different avenues just weren't feeling right. And like I said, I was hodgepodging it together. And you can even use us as an example. I don't mind. But that first initial talking to a parent, what does that look like?
So I tend to be pretty extensive with parents when I talk to them. I have a written out intake that I make parents fill out, and that's everything from their sleep schedule, their nutrition, doctor's information, diagnosis. But then I also like to talk to the parents prior to meeting them and prior to meeting the child. And what I'm trying to gauge is how comfortable they are, what their paradigms of beliefs are, and what their perspective is on their child having abilities. And that kind of gives me a good gauge of how I'm going to walk in there to meet the child, and also what I'm going to walk into. In your case, you're a little unique in the fact that you had already done your own intuitive healing, accepted that you had abilities yourself. Um, a lot of families, when I walk in, it's really, really focused on the child. The child has, unusual things happening, or the child has abilities, but the parents haven't necessarily applied it to themselves. And so they're doing everything they can to help their child, of course, but they aren't necessarily looking at themselves or even looking at their family as a unit with this child. And that's understandable. It's a very scary, jarring thing. And as you know, when you have a child with extreme intuitive abilities, they can easily shut the whole family down or stop them in their tracks.
I know with us, when we first spoke, I felt like I was talking a ton. And what I found interesting when I started speaking to you is I've spoken to other intuitive people, but I even hold back even to a degree with them. And I don't remember, I think maybe because we are far enough in the journey and because I can be so open about certain things, I remember pretty much telling you the hard stuff, the really difficult stuff, the stuff that felt off the wall,
Mm.
stuff that, I even have trouble telling, my therapist, because it's it's difficult. And it also too, when you don't understand, when you're seeing your child experience these things and it's never something you've seen before, you usually don't have the verbiage for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
then you start stumbling and it doesn't come out as smoothly as you'd like. And you also realize that if you are telling somebody what is going on and they have had no experience with it whatsoever, they can't understand the weight in which you are trying to explain it.
Right.
Um, obviously they'll think about it as being something crazy. But I didn't feel that way with you, even though I felt like I was doing a majority of the talking in the beginning. So,
No, and you shouldn't, because that's kind of like that's kind of how I try to hold my energy. I try to hold my presence. And to be honest, with the life that I lived, there is nothing you're going to tell me that's going to weird me out. Actually, probably what would weird me out is we had a normal day and absolutely nothing happened. So no family, no parents, no child, they're never going to tell me something that's going to weird me out or I'm going to think it's strange. I think there is some confusion between physical diagnosis and what's spiritually happening. And as you know, like I really support approaching both. But other than that, there's really not much that can be said to me that I'm going to be, whoa, I don't even know how to process that. I don't even know how to handle that. And if I don't know something, I do everything I can to find the answer or just point blank tell you that I don't know about. We're going to have to sit on that or think about it.
so then when you move from there, so you make a decision on your part, and the family makes a decision on their part whether or not they would like to proceed in meeting you, or usually you go to their home.
Yeah, so usually I go to their home. And the reason that I like to go to others' homes is because when a child is experiencing the majority of their activity, it either tends to be in school with other students or at their house. Taking them out of that environment, not only is it uncomfortable for them if they're very sensitive and easily overwhelmed by noises, sounds, smells, but on top of that, like I like to get a firsthand view. I can intuitively pick up on a lot of things and I can sense a lot of things, but it's much better to see the environment and see how the environment responds to them and vice versa. And when I did start working with Dominic, that was one of the first things you and I talked about was the experience the experience he went through explaining to me what he was going through and how your house responded. And that's a big part of it. He needs to feel like he's safe in your house. He needs to feel like this is sacred space. So being able to work with the child in their own home is a huge plus or a huge benefit.
I didn't even think of it that way, even though that's been a huge part of this journey for us, is in how the house has responded.
Mm.
And then also too, I think, Marie Kondo right now is doing a fabulous job of it, is realizing that the house has a presence, that the house has a
Very
life of
much
its
alive.
own. It's
Yep.
very much alive,
Yep.
which is in the beginning can be make you nervous. I
Hmm.
mean, that's how I ended up on this journey, was I thought that something was going on with the house. The house was the reason. And I
Right.
think a lot of people, I mean, am I wrong? Do a lot of people think it's their
Oh,
house?
you're absolutely right. A lot of people think it's the land or the house, and we have a lot of TV shows and media that perpetuate that thought. But in the case of a child that has abilities, as you know, it doesn't really matter where you go. It doesn't matter if you're in a restaurant, at a park, it doesn't matter. They're going to experience something. And so my approach has always been, rather than fixate on why it's the land or the house, what we should be asking always, even with the ghost shows and everything like that, is why. Because the spirit world never stops. It's around us all the time. So why are you seeing what you're seeing right now? There's got to be a reason. And it's the same for the children. Why are they experiencing what they're experiencing right now in their life in your house? There's a reason.
Okay. So now that you've come into the house, and how do you handle certain different situations with certain children?
So it's, some of it is guided by the parents. Sometimes parents are very blunt with me and they'll tell me right off the bat they don't want to talk about the abilities. They just want me to come in and do a few exercises or check out the home or give a healing to the child and see what happens. Other times they want to sit down, they want to explain to the child exactly who I am, what I'm coming in to do, and have a very formal discussion. And then sometimes with children, I prefer to just not even talk about it, because what I find, as you know, is the child just naturally starts talking about it. I come in with the intention or the energy that anything that child needs in terms of knowledge of their abilities is there around me, and they can sense it, they can pick up on it. I come in with the intention that it's going to be open and very loving. And a lot of times, without any prompting, the children just start talking about it. And a lot of times siblings do too. So sometimes families will tell me, oh, it's just one child. And within the first visit, every child now is talking, well, I had this experience and I had this experience. And that's without any prompting from me. It just naturally happens and naturally flows.
That's what we did. I mean, I don't like to give, for our situation here, Dominic doesn't do well with heads ups
Right.
for certain things. I mean, I don't know. I just have to trust my gut on that. But I did not choose to give him a heads up and just allowed you to come. And I didn't give any formal, I didn't want to prompt him to tell you things until he knew who you were. And that, not even prompting him in that case, but sometimes there are things that I know he wants to tell you, but then he gets caught up doing other things. I wanted him to be able to use you as somebody to confide in other than myself,
Right.
and also have somebody who he knew could understand where he's coming from, because he is very honest with everybody and doesn't try to hide it. But I've noticed even lately, just naturally, he's filtering out, experiences or attacks or things that have happened to him in scenarios he's explaining to people. And it's the first time ever that I've noticed that he's started to do that. But I wanted him to have somebody who he could express those things to and not be a parent, because I knew there was going to be a time here where in his teen years where he's going to need to break away from me. And I wanted him to have somebody in his toolbox to
Yeah.
go to, because I know the teen years can be so difficult.
Mm.
Okay. So I can't imagine having a child with abilities, and this isn't a judgment, and how difficult it would be in your position to not discuss the abilities with the family. So is that difficult for you? Is it not difficult for you? Is it
Um,
create a issue for you later?
it presents different challenges. That's what I would say. Is I definitely have parents that want their child to have their own time with me, but then there's no communication about what that child's doing, what that child's working on, or if there is, it's very limited. Some of the children prefer that, because they are so sensitive to their parents. So in some cases, if they have a parent that tends to be deeply empathetic, whether they realize it or not, and the child starts sharing, they were dealing with lower vibrations or heavy emotions, the parent will take it on. So some of the children actually prefer to be separate, but what really stinks about it is that some of these children naturally, again, without any prompting, know they have very specific things that they need to get done, and they're doing everything they can to do those things. And sometimes they're big things with their abilities, like they feel the need to heal their ancestral line, or they feel the need to use their abilities to deal with their timelines and their karma and the karma of the family, or even humanity as a whole. And they don't get to share any of that. They don't get to share this really cool adventure that they're taking with their abilities. And that's kind of heartbreaking in some ways. And in other ways, I understand. And sometimes the parents, it's just too much for them. They know that they get a baseline that their child is okay. They can see improvement in their child, and that's what they're happy knowing. And then other parents really want to know all the details, know exactly what's happening, what they're doing with their abilities or not doing with their abilities, what challenges are presenting themselves. It's dependent on the family and the child.
When the kids speak to you about certain things, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Actually, no, I'm going to feel like I'm jumping ahead. I want to discuss about when you come in there to work with the kids, could you give an example of what you do, or like,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So typically a session or a healing, I usually come in and we do like an intake process where the child can update me. And the child will tell me whatever's happening in their life, whatever they think is pertinent to the situation, dreams, experiences. Um, when they get older and they get to their teen years and their preteen years, they're going to start to put together that there's patterns, and they'll start developing their own language to describe different things. So that intake evolves as they get older. They get more specific, their expression gets more specific, they can start discerning what they're dealing with. When it's a child, typically it's just like, a vomit of everything that's going on, and you just kind of roll with it. But a teenager is going to be much better at kind of creating almost like a task list of everything that happened, everything that needs to be done. What I like to do then is finish the session or the time with offering my insights, offering validation, but then I usually try to go through and do different exercises for them to be able to discern what exactly they're dealing with, how to hone their abilities, how to help their bodies deal with these different energies, and or finish with a healing. And the reason that I include the healing is because every time you heal someone, healing is based off of that bubble of energy that's around you. And so when you initially go to heal someone, the very first thing you do is you separate them from outside energies to where it's just their energy. And a lot of times children that have abilities, they can't naturally do that. They don't have a filter. So giving them, even if it's just 3 minutes where it's just their energy and the presence of someone with their heart open, or, with the presence of knowing that, can be life altering for them. And it gives them a point of comparison to then compare everything else. Like, okay, if my energy feels like this and I'm not feeling too bad, well, then it must mean that it must be an outside source that's causing me to feel really down on myself. Or I feel really down on myself. I need to figure out what's happening. Or the energy's really popping when it's just me. But then when I interact with other people, I feel very dull. I feel like my energy's drained. They start to get that discernment naturally. And that's why that's so important.
Do you want to talk about, because I don't feel like this is too breaching, do you want to talk about, just as an example, what you were showing my kids with the chicken?
Sure. So, with your children, especially with Dominic, Dominic is definitely a go-getter and he likes to explore and find things on his own. So it'll never work if I tell Dominic, do this, 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 and this. He likes to find his own pathway. He's very intelligent, he's clever, he likes that. That really excites him. So teaching him how to heal something else, he'll naturally apply it to himself, which he obviously did. So what we did is we went out and we talked about heart energy, what it feels like to be in your heart, what it feels like to be in your body, what it feels like to be outside of your body, and how do you heal another living being using that knowledge. And in this case, specifically physically, what we did is we felt the chicken's energy, and then we set the intention to offer them love and healing. And both Eve, I think Eve was out there with us, both Eve and Dominic felt the difference, or we talked about the difference. And then he went even deeper with it. And that's the thing with children that have abilities, is you don't have to say much. You just have to be in their presence. They pick up a lot of it energetically. They start putting it together energetically. And so if I remember correctly, he then had all kinds of stuff to tell you about that experience and knew what to do and took it even a couple steps further than what I physically told him.
Right. Yeah, he did. And then I remember him using that. Well, I had gotten sick in February, and then it was, I don't mind talking about the trickiness of it because this is a legitimate concern when you first experience it. So you had done that thing with the chicken. And then I had gotten sick, and Dominic had put his hand on me and said, I want to help you. I want to heal you. And I said, stop, stop, stop. I don't want you taking on what I
Right.
have. And he says, no, I don't do that. I take it and change it back into something good. And then I put it back. So transmutation, mutation, right?
Mutation and
Transmute.
transfiguring. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but I feel like I always slow up in those situations just because I need him to clarify to me what he's about to do.
No, I think that's important. So, like, this is the other thing that's tricky when you have abilities. When you have intuitive abilities, you can't hold them, right? They're not 3D. You're feeling. And even when you see things in your mind's eye and you have visions and things like that, it's a different sensation. It's not like seeing something in front of you, though you can see things very physically. And so part of the task of helping a child that has intuitive abilities, that's part of that spiritual world or more in the spiritual world, is helping them question and critically think. So you did exactly the right thing, because you want him thinking about all those things. Energy and how it functions in the physical world, or spirits and how it functions in the physical world, you need your brain working as well as your heart or your sensations of feeling. The point is to be spiritual while you're physical at the same time.
Okay. So now that we kind of discussed that, when you start working with kids, do they ever, I mean, I assume, like discuss with you, or do you have like a main thing that bothers them the most, or a couple things that bother them the most, or it could be with relationship with the parent, it could be, I mean, I'm sure it varies.
I think so. Most of the time, by the time I get the families and the children have been, and the family have been through the ringer in terms of pain, chronic pain, migraines. They've been through the healthcare system, and usually the children are just exhausted and they don't have a lot of fight left in them. So usually one of the first things that I'm battling is trying to just get them excited and to almost like reopen their mind, and say, okay, I know that you've been doing all these things, and I know all these people said these things to you, but I need you to just kind of let loose and have fun and feel a couple things for me. The teenagers, a lot of them are uncomfortable. They just want it to be over. They just want to be normal. So that's usually one of the first battles. They feel really silly doing all these different exercises. They feel silly getting healings, which is normal because at that point you're starting to compare yourself to others, and you know that the way that you're living is not how others are living. Also, just having a conversation. So, as you stated earlier, when you've been through the ringer in terms of mental health and healthcare, and by no means am I saying that it's wrong or bad, but you're used to just listing out all the facts of everything that has happened and then someone telling you, that's not a conversation. So even just getting back in the mode of having a conversation as a family unit or with the child and getting their opinions, like, what do you feel about it? Let's kind of get rid of the idea of like, we want to get rid of it, and instead just tell me what it's like. What is it like to have this experience? What does it feel like? And opening that conversation back up.
Well, you're creating discernment in that too.
Yep.
I know you and I have talked about how, as a parent, I always just want to fix everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially with them being so little. And I, I've almost been put out of my comfort zone in this case because I can't fix something that isn't happening to me.
Yep.
And it's really humbled me in the case of having to say, I don't know. And also to let go, because on our side, which I don't mind sharing, was Dominic would get these attacks and then somehow he would take my own energy. This was a hard lesson for me to learn. And then I would be warped for 3 hours. I'd be like dead asleep on the I couldn't understand that every time he was experiencing something, 3 hours later I've been like asleep. And you know, we really had, it was nice to have somebody. I knew something was going on, but I wasn't sure how he was doing it and how to stop it, because he wasn't using his own discernment, and he wasn't able to learn how to stop those things from not stop
Yeah.
them,
Well,
like
and he's
he
also a
wasn't.
kid, so
Yeah,
he
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
understand. It's
No,
exactly like you said, there's no discernment there yet.
no. So he was, I mean, I very well could be giving it to him too.
Yeah, it's a give and take. So this is like a really common problem with children and parents. And you'll notice like a seesawing, like the parents have a good day and then the children, have kind of a stinky day, and then the children have a really good day and the parents have a stinky day, and they're actually going back and forth energetically. When they get a little bit older, although some of the younger ones can grasp this idea, what you start to realize is that your energy is interacting with all the energy around you. And with your parents specifically, you have, like, if you would imagine almost a tube or a cord running between you, you can constantly touch in and use that energy and vice versa. It's exactly how you have the mother's intuition and know your child's up to no good or knows your child's experiencing something even though they can't express it. And the child does the same thing with the parents. They can tell the parents lying to them. They can tell the parents feeling some type of emotion but not talking about it. And it's through that energetic exchange. And absolutely, you can drain that. So if he's in a situation where he's going into survival mode, he's too scared to go to sleep, or something is on top of him, what do you think he's going to grab? He's going to grab his mom. That's what everyone wants. And you as a mother, if you're in a situation where you feel like you have to protect your children, you'll do that even energetically, and you'll shut your children down. There's an energetic threat without even realizing it. You'll go right through that cord and shut them down energetically to cover them up and make sure they aren't seen, or make sure they, stay under the radar as much as you can.
So there was something that I wanted to, oh, I remember. This kind of like as a side note, but I remember you and I discussing once about how like things that aren't healed in the grandparents and parents, it moves down into the children healing it.
Yep.
And could you explain that a bit further? Like,
so
in experiences, I mean, you could make an example.
Yeah. So you have DNA, which is the scientific side of that. So everything that you have, your child has a piece of, and that's how it goes down the line. But from an energetic point of view, also, all your thoughts, your beliefs, your words, your actions, your traumas, even just the good stuff, all has an energetic component to it, or an energetic signature. If you don't deal with that, eventually you'll hit a point where that becomes your child's luggage. And that comes right down the lines. And I got to be honest with you, when the children start opening up their abilities, for whatever reason, that's one of the first things they pick up on, and it's one of the first things they start dealing with and going after, is whatever the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents haven't dealt with. It is now, it feels like it's suffocating them. It feels like it's unnecessary weight. And it's one of the first things that they naturally, intuitively try to eliminate. We do it all the time and we don't realize it. So we compartmentalize basically is what's happening. So if we go through a trauma and we've got to stay level-headed, we push the energy and the emotions from that trauma away from us. We are not trained a lot of times as a society to then bring that back in and deal with it when we're in a calmer place. Instead, we keep it away from us. The idea I think we have without realizing it is it'll just go somewhere else, but it doesn't energetically. It literally sits in your field. Sometimes it comes into your body and affects your body. And when the children with abilities come in, they pick up on it immediately. Which because based on your history of what you told me, that was one of the first things you had to do, was start looking at yourself, start healing. And you realized and put together really quickly you were having a profound effect on Dominic.
Does those experiences, and I'm just going by a book I had read, Mark Woolen's It Didn't Start With You. But then also too, there was a YouTube video with Elena Brower where she had talked about this, where experiences actually re-show up. So for instance, what you'd see was a mother who had dealt with sexual assault as a child, but then kept it down. And then almost at the exact same age, her daughter would experience the same thing that happened. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't talk about it. Or same thing with suicide and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting facet, not only of intuitive children, but in healing in general.
Yeah.
Because even though this feels like, the more you get to know about the spiritual world, I'm sure the more overwhelming and chaotic it feels. But the reality is everything has a pattern and a rhythm to it. It's just a matter of cracking that pattern and that rhythm. You also have to keep in mind is that these children choose their families for a reason. So sometimes these really horrific, awful things that happen, of course, you don't want anyone to go through it, but there is a tiny piece of the child that is within their soul that knew that was going to happen and that was going to be part of the journey, or there was a possibility and that was going to be part of the journey. Sometimes when these children open up their abilities, they're opening them up to try to prevent some of the repeat of these traumas. So like if they know their parents carry this certain level of growth or this certain trauma and growth from it, why would they need to repeat it? They don't want to reinvent the wheel. They'd rather keep moving forward. So sometimes they open up earlier so that they can actually change the pathway of the parent, heal that pattern, so that they can move on to the next stage or the next piece of growth.
And I mean, I've also heard too that with children, they're taking on their karma earlier, and in order to get it out of the way.
Yep. Yeah.
Is
So like the idea is, and this is how I felt mine was, is the idea is you should be so in the moment energetically that essentially everything's unwritten. Um, but sometimes your karma, or like what we're referring to as karma, like your past patterns, the patterns of your families, the patterns of your parents, they can be so strong that they dictate what your options are in the future. They dictate who you're going to be, obviously through DNA, but also in your actions, in your thoughts, in your personality. And so opening that up sooner gives them the ability to get through that as quick as possible, so that by the time they're in their teenage years or young adult, they now are starting the new venture or the new purpose of whatever they're supposed to be doing.
okay. So I want to move back to your work and with the kids and everything like that. How do you feel? I mean, maybe let's talk about like tricky scenarios, I think. Let's
Sure.
let's talk about that. I think also too I want to talk about tricky scenarios as in stuff we usually don't talk about, because I think parents are going through this and they don't either know what they're looking at, or they want validation in understanding what their kids are seeing, and they can't ask anybody. So I'll give an example with us and you can go along with it if you want. So for us, I didn't understand the grid, and I didn't understand how those things work. Are there other tricky scenarios in which um tricky, I don't know, things that we don't talk about?
Right. So with the grid, so in Dominic's case, he's, which we know you've discussed on previous podcasts, he's opening things that now have to do with the past and the future. The grid is essentially an energetic form or roadway to access all timelines and dimensions, alternate realities. It's very complex, but simple at the same time. So it's complex to the human brain, but very simple from an energetic standpoint. He has to be able to access that information, or rather to apply it, because you can access that information just through Akashics, but he's actually actively applying it on his own. Neither me nor you are encouraging him to do that. He's naturally trying to adjust things. He has to open up essentially a doorway to a grid, or the grid of time, of dimensions. And so in your case, not surprisingly, but a surprise to you, he opened that grid in your bedroom, which was probably because that's where he feels the safest, but it also gives him the opportunity that there's like a second set of eyes on it. Because just like he can use that grid to travel and apply, so can other things, which is what you experienced. Is not only was it open, but things were looking in and coming in. And a scenario like that is, it's not totally unusual, but it's not usual. Again, it's a child that has advanced abilities, and that would be a scenario of how and when do we deal with this. That's very unique to Dominic. It's not surprising that a child would open that when they're starting their teenage years, because, like I said, that's when that critical thinking starts. You picking up the fact that he's filtering these different things, that's because that that is what's happening in his body's evolution right now. That deeper level of thinking and comparison is starting to open up. He's starting to register how his words, his stories are affecting other people, but also how they view him. And it's like that critical thinking part. But it's really, every scenario is unique, and that's why I say don't hesitate telling me anything. Also, don't hesitate to tell me like the emotional and the mental outlook. Some children, I think the parents think like if they're not seeing a ghost, it's unrelated. But when you have abilities, the blunt way to say it is everything's related. When they are dealing with the spiritual more than the physical, everything that's happening on a daily basis is somehow related. The way they play, who they're attracted to, the things they're reading, the things they're watching. And if you let them have a conversation with you about it, they're going to tell you that. I can remember doing this over here, or I needed to do this. It felt right. And then they're on a whole new track of thinking. And so, you know, even those emotional outbursts, sometimes there's a reason for that that has nothing to do with the physical. It's totally in the spiritual.
Yeah, I think also here's an example with that was when we were going through that, right? So we're talking about opening something up, right? And paying attention to everything being connected to one another. So during that time, these are things that I was paying attention to. All of a sudden, all my doorknobs in my house became so loose that we had to go around and like tighten all the doorknobs, like falling out of the doors randomly. And so that happened. And then what else were we finding? Oh, outside my window, we have a pond, and there's been an osprey there daily. So osprey is, I mean, they're not rare, but they're not, we don't live near the water. We don't live near the bay. We're inland, you know?
Right.
There's not supposed to be an osprey at my house
Right.
for the most part. So then I went and looked what the spiritual totem for osprey is. And what I got was osprey have their foot in the physical and the spiritual, and because osprey, I think they were one of the only birds that dive like not only birds, but hawk that dives underwater to get their fish, water being the spiritual and the emotional. So it's a representation of somebody going into the dipping into the spiritual and coming back into the physical.
Some
So,
other really common examples is if someone in the house is having high emotion, or the child's having high emotion and they swallow it all down and they aren't doing anything with it, guaranteed that family's going to have plumbing issues almost
oh,
always. If there's something going on with the energy body and they aren't dealing with it. So if, say, outside sources are hitting them over and over again, or, you know, they're bringing weight from a neighbor home or from another child home and they aren't dealing with it, you'll have car issues. The car usually, for whatever reason, represents the spiritual body. When you dream, the car represents your spiritual body. Unfortunately, when you have children that have abilities, your whole life, you know, can have meaning if you allow it. And usually, like I said, there's a pattern. The physical is very much affected by the spiritual. We often view it the opposite, that we have an influence on the spiritual, but it's totally not that way. The spiritual is around us all the time. It's interacting with us all the time, and it has a profound effect on the physical.
there you go. Now you get. Uh, I always ask people to write in a journal when they first starting, like what you think are coincidences or what's going on in your head, and then what's happening on the physical that and seems to be related. And the
Right.
thing is that once you start writing them down, you start to really see that they're really not coincidences.
Right.
Um, I mean, I get a lot of the animal situation over here. I mean, I don't think I'm the only one.
Right.
I have a friend whose husband died pretty like quickly, and her kids kept telling her, daddy's a hawk, daddy's a hawk. And she was at a friend's house and a hawk just flew right into a window or something, and then the hawk proceeded to just sit on her arm for an hour, and then it flew
Wow.
away. But she said, there's hawks following me all the time. Hawks, 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 hawks.
Mm.
So, and I don't think that's abnormal. This
Right.
happens for people.
Right.
Okay. So, what do you think, as a parent, I think what I would want to know is, like, what could you give us as pieces of information into actually what we can do to help our kids, even if it's stuff that has to do with ourselves or things that we do that hinder or help?
Okay. Um, I think one of the big misconceptions with parents and children with abilities, and it's definitely not done on purpose, but is this idea that their abilities only exist in certain places or at certain times of the day. And what it does is it kind of causes a separation. So there's, two Dominics. There's the Dominic that's out in public with friends, and then there's a Dominic that's home. And one of the best ways that you can help your child is just change your thinking as this is part of who they naturally are. This isn't anything wrong with them. It's scary right now, but it's scary right now because they don't know what to do with it, and or you don't have the information yet. But it's part of the child didn't go looking for it. It's part of who they naturally are, and thus the goal is to allow them to implement it in their daily life, no matter what they're doing. Not every child has to become a psychic or an intuit or a healer, but getting their abilities in a place where they can function and have a fulfilling life is the goal. And part of that goal is just kind of changing your thinking a little bit and knowing, okay, this is part of them all the time. It isn't just certain times of the day. It isn't just certain situations or certain people. This is who they are all the time. So if you're only seeing it in certain situations, start asking why. And that is another big thing is a lot of parents are really good at asking what they're seeing. Some parents are even better in saying, okay, how do you feel about it? But I find a whole lot of people don't ask why. Why are they experiencing it right now? Why are you as a family going through this? And that's a hard concept because a lot of times it just feels so foreign. You kind of want to band-aid it. You want to either get rid of it or have a way for the child to deal with this and be able to move on back to your normal life. But there's a reason why you're experiencing it. I think the other major thing, well, I guess what I would say is also be open to exploring yourself. So many times parents will say they never have any abilities, but abilities are a lot broader than we realize. So, usually by the third or fourth visit, the parents will let something loose where they're like, oh, I know what that feels like. Or no, I don't have any antique furniture because it weirds me out. It feels totally weird. Those are empath abilities. So know that your abilities don't have to be something dramatic. You can have abilities and all it is just a sense. It's walking in a room and immediately liking someone and immediately hating someone else, and you have no physical evidence of it. And your child who has abilities, you can kind of filter that out, but your child who has abilities can't necessarily filter it out. So they want to know why. Why do I like this person and I don't like that person? And I don't like this person to the point I don't want to be here. Why? Whereas adults or when you get older, you tend to just ignore it. Your abilities can be a lot more broad. Your child's abilities can be a lot more broad than a traumatic moment.
I have a question about that. Well, and I've asked you this question before, and I think it's kind of just really important of something that we might need to go into a bit.
Sure.
Why during those traumatic moments, right? Or a kid being really sick, or a kid being, feeling like a spiritual attack or whatnot. Why during those moments do I find that the abilities kick up, tenfold,
So some of it is probably survival and the need to protect. So, some part of you is activating because it needs to know what's happening, what your child's experiencing. Same for the child. The child knows something is shifting outside of them and within them, that it's dynamically changing their emotions, their outlook, how their body feels. Some children, like as in my case, some children go through bouts where they can't walk because the experiences are so significant. Sometimes their whole mental outlook changes in a matter of a couple seconds, and they're saying things that just don't even sound like them. And so your abilities heighten, not only because that doorway is now open in that event, because it's a spiritual, energetic event, but also because it needs to. There's a part of you that's registering that where this threat is coming from is not physical. So part of you is trying to get a hold of the situation and figure out what can you do with what's happening? What information can you gather?
And the other, I know there's like, a whole lot of talk about why, that we're going to see more children coming in with these abilities, more and more and more. I guess this is a two-part question. Why them? Why are we needing more kids coming in? And then also too, why are these, I mean, at least in our case, but why are these kids, or how are these kids being kind of targeted by lower vibrating? We talked about them being a beacon of energy, and then things needing that energy. I mean, they're almost two separate questions that I just pushed into one, but I think you understand both questions. I can re-ask one after you answer the other.
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of forgotten is evolution. So, we have evolution as humanity in a very physical way, but we also have spiritual evolution. And some of these children, when they start opening up their abilities, they'll talk very bluntly about that. They're very aware that things are ascending and descending. They're very aware that they came in for things to ascend and descend. So some of it is just evolution. It's not necessarily we need them. It's we're attracting them because we're evolving. And they're coming in to give us the things we need to keep evolving, to keep making that journey back to God or back to home, or, enlightenment, however you choose to see that destination. Why are lower vibrations attracted to these children? Well, what I would say is, unfortunately, there's nothing more painful than dealing with humanity. Humanity isn't necessarily low vibrational, but a lot of what the child experiences as attacks comes from humanity. And those are thought forms. People who aren't using their emotions, they've manifested things through not dealing with things, anxiety and stuff like that. And then lower vibrations, and I hesitate saying this because it's the opposite of what so many believe, but it is what I have found in my work, both personally and working with children, is if you imagine the lower vibrations as being more like children throwing temper tantrums, they're there trying to get attention, and they're there for the same reasons the higher vibration is there. So either they need love, acceptance, or help, and or they're there for growth. It's very hard for our brains to see it that way because lower vibrational tend to have more of an impact on our physical world or our physical body in what we view as very negative things. But when you get to it, down to it from an energetic standpoint, when the child really starts working with it, that's typically why they're there. It's not like they're just attacking the child. They saw a beacon of light. They're seeking the same thing. Everyone is seeking to be accepted, a community, to love, to move on. They need help. They need support. I say this very bluntly, that's even the demonics and the things that really scare us. Everything is seeking the same thing. And everything is there as a moment of growth, which is why I always encourage to ask why. And that doesn't mean they have to take it on. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous. But it's good to have that understanding, and that helps with your discernment and how you approach it, right? Obviously, when we want to approach things with clear boundaries, but also from a point of love. We don't want to approach anything out of hate. We don't want to manipulate anything. We don't want to control anything, which is something that I teach. And that's also applied for yourself. We don't want these children getting in a position where they feel like they're using their abilities to control and manipulate, where they don't feel anything, which is a very common response, is I have these abilities. I don't want to feel anything, and I don't want any bad around me. I need to change the future. I need to change the family dynamics. And that's the wrong approach. And that can have a very negative effect, not only on them, but also their family and their community.
I see a lot on these parent forums of people. It kind of drives me a little bit crazy, and I hope I don't get any hate mail about it. It's because it's not really a judgment. It just, I think I'd like your insight onto it, is we have parents or teenagers. They come and they send a picture, and it's like, my child sees spirits in their bedroom at night, and I need to know what to do about it. And people give their 3-sentence diagnosis of what's going on with the kid, and they should give them obsidian and spray the room with whatever, and everything will go away. And you can smudge the house, which I did, and those things can help. But I'd like your take on that.
Sure.
It never feels, to me, it just feels like, it's like going to a Facebook room to say, like, I have a certain diagnosis, and or I feel this way, can you diagnose me? I'd like your insight on that.
Yeah, I think we're battling a lack of knowledge. So I think that the common viewpoint of spirituality and energy medicine, or just dealing with energy and spirits, is that it's this woo-woo thing. And there is no science to back it up, because a lot of it is feeling. But energy is a very real thing. There is science to back it up. So part of it is just lack of knowledge. But the other thing is, a lot of people are looking for Band-Aids. They're looking for quick fixes. So everything you listed is a quick fix. And if you're really, really lucky, it's going to buy you some time. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. But what it comes down to when it does work is whether this child's purpose is to truly open up their abilities. Because if their purpose is to open up their abilities, it's not going to make a dang difference if you sage. That spirit will be back in a matter of hours, days, weeks. It's coming back. And it also comes down to a point of belief. Those tools are a way for your brain to focus and set up protection. But like I said, the reality is the spiritual world is around you all the time. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it ceased to exist. So having the power of sage or crystals, they are good in the sense that they can give you a point of focus, a point of belief, but they aren't actually solving the problem. I use crystals and sage with children. I think crystals are a great way. It's a physical way to hold something and feel different types of energy. If a child is dealing with something very dark, I will definitely bring in crystals that have more of a higher vibration, and I get the child to feel that higher vibration. Is the crystal actually doing anything? Not really. It's a point of focus. It's the child being able to discern what's good energy and bad energy. It's the ability to help set those boundaries for your brain and your body. But from an energy standpoint, that stone does have energy, but is it enough to stop your purpose or stop spirits from moving around and doing their thing? No, it's not. It still keeps going and existing. So for some parents, that will be a good fix because the issue is minor. But for a lot of families and a lot of parents, it's just going to be a band-aid. It's not going to fix the core of the problem, which is the child's abilities are opening up for a reason.
All right. I think one last thing I'd ask is for the people who are starting out, if you could give either one tool or, I mean, you've given a lot today, but maybe like just one step, one tool, one thing for the person who's starting to see things, like to starting to see things in their children.
I think one of the best tools, very simple, without going into any science of energy and spiritual world and grids and everything like that. One of the simplest tools is to have your child explain the experience, what they experienced, and then have them compare to what they're actually feeling in their body, Like, what does your body feel like? Not just your emotions. Like, does your stomach hurt? Does your head hurt? Because when you open up spiritually, the tendency is to kind of evacuate your body almost. You're more out of your body than in, and you got to get your child back in their body. That's what's going to make them feel grounded. That's what's going to make them feel safe. And that's also part of the skill of letting them be able to function in a very physical, real world. So asking them what their body feels like, as you know, you only have to ask it a couple times. All of a sudden, your child will start exploring. What does my body feel like? What am I feeling today? I don't like this. Oh, I don't like the way this tastes. I don't like you need to have them in their body just as much as they're experiencing outside of their body, or the bigger part of them than just their physical body.
We've been doing this for a while now because I noticed Dominic was so out of his body. And now it's interesting because he references his body as my body says, my body says, my body, like as if the body, is a separate thing.
And it's true. So
Yeah.
like every energy that hits you has an effect on your body. Something is happening to your body. Every twitch that you experience, every time you push your hair behind your ears, there's a psychological point of view, a nervousness or something that's going on within you, but then there's also a spiritual response to it. And so your body is really a compass in so many ways when dealing with the spiritual. And the more you get in your body, the more you're going to realize your body's working with you. It's not working against you. And sometimes I find that these children experience pain because they aren't in their body and their body's desperately trying to pull them in. And when they start learning to balance that, some of that pain goes away.
That's interesting. Anything left you'd want to say before I put this to an end?
No, I had a great time.
Oh, good. I'm glad. How can my listeners find you?
So what I can do is give you an email, and hopefully I'll have somewhat of a website up by the time these air, but at the very least I can provide an email. And then can you attach that to your podcast?
Yeah, I can put it in the show notes.
Yep, you can do it that way.
All right, wonderful. Well, Thank you so much for doing this long haul with me. I know
Thank
it's so it's refreshing is like not the word I want to use, but it is that this was so long of a finding somebody. It just felt like it was evading me for so long. Nothing ever fit.
you.
And when we finally were able when we finally connected, I was so happy to be able to have something that fit, that somebody understood the nooks and crannies of and how how tricky, how complex.
Yeah, it's definitely a dance and an
Yeah,
adventure. Every day is different.
yeah, it is, and just to surely be able to talk to somebody, you know,
Right.
it helps you not think you're crazy,
Yeah.
but in general, just be able to be able to relate to somebody to understand and who's gone through it. You know, you're not
I
just
think that's important for the children too, because
yeah,
they can tell. They can feel when someone's actually been through it or when they're parroting just information that they read or from a class. It's totally different. It's totally different when you've actually lived it versus you've learned it. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but when you learn from experience, the vibration and the energy is totally different versus you learned it from a textbook.
oh, anybody can see that. I guarantee you, if somebody's gone through cancer, right, and they have a doctor who went through cancer or lost a spouse to cancer, I guarantee you it's a different feeling. Or somebody who's lost a parent speaking to somebody else who had lost a parent, or I mean anything.
Right.
You do. It doesn't have to be something quote unquote negative, but you feel it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
I can't wait to we got a long road of other things to do together, I guarantee you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.